I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review, where we have our AI, Design Eye, look at an old competition piece of mine and give us some feedback based on the principles and elements of design, which is how we are judged in competitions, and some suggestions for improvement of the design. This week we're looking at Colours of Sunset. As you can see, it was staged on the bench. Width was 70 centimetres, I think, from memory, and the height was unlimited. A little bit hard to see in the image because they were trestle tables with no backing behind them, so each class sort of blends in with the one behind it a little bit. They were judged from the front. In this design, I decided it was my string art period when I was experimenting with string art and how it could be used in floral designs. And so in other videos, you'll see a number of other ways that I've used the concept of string art in structures for designs. But this particular one, I had a piece of square perspex that I had previously experimented with in terms of practicing string art, basically, to see how I could use it, more so for a wall hanging or a collage or something like that, where really the design was on the front rather than the front and the back. So I thought, well, this is a test for me to see what I can do with this design. So it has holes drilled at intervals all the way around the edge, and through those holes I have put sections of bamboo skewer and glued them in as well as pushed them in. So the hole was probably would have held it, but I wanted that extra security, so they are glued in as well. And I've used them as the basis for the stringing. Because they go through both sides of the perspex, I can string at the back and the front, which is what I've done here. So on the back of the design, the stringing is done in a certain pattern with natural jute string, and the front of the design uses coloured jute string in the colours of the sunset. That also enabled me to have a structure where I could place plant material. I've used colours that reflect the sunset idea with the yellow crospedia or belly buttons, the bird of paradise, which has got a little bit of the purple in it, so you get that hint of what the darkened sky is like. And there's some grey dried foliage, which is a little bit hard to see in the image, but it is there and gives it a little bit of wispiness and clouds floating by, that sort of thing. I've placed it on a circular blue base, and looking at the design now, I can see that that's not as good as it could have been, because the blue is not reflected anywhere else in the design. I won't talk about that, but let's see what AI has got to say, and I'll do my comments as I do all the way through. So with that, let us have a look now at what Design Eye has ascertained from this design in its analysis. So an overall comment first of all, this contemporary floral design titled Colours of Sunset is a captivating interplay of structure, fibre art and selective floral material, all meticulously integrated into a highly architectural format. It's a brilliant fusion of string art and floral design, producing a radiating sunburst effect that clearly ties to the theme. So that's a good overall assessment. It is my assessment as well of the design. I do think that it is a good interpretation. You know, looking at it independently, it's an interesting and different interpretation of the theme, and it does bring into play the idea of materials that are plant-based but are not necessarily flowers or foliage. And this was at a time, it's a number of years ago now, at a time where we started to be allowed to use certain things that were plant-based materials. So that's why I've used the jute string, because that in this competition would constitute plant material, as well as providing me with a little bit of colour that I might not otherwise be able to get in the colour variations in terms of plant material, depending on the time of year, of course. So let's now look individually at the principles and elements of design and see what AI has got to say for us. Balance, first of all. The design has a strong symmetrical balance along both the vertical and horizontal axes. The string pattern is evenly distributed, centering visual weight at the focal point, so that's in the centre where the bird of paradise emerges. Physical balance is achieved through a stable base and the lightweight nature of the material. That's good. I think it's balanced in terms of the fact that it is very structural and measured in its presentation. The only things that might throw it off balance a little bit is the placement of some of the plant material, though I have got those at regular intervals. And so looking at the Craspedia particularly, but the what you can't see is clearly the grey dried material is not as regularly placed, because I was trying to emanate clouds, and so they're not regular in the sky necessarily. But let's see what else it's got to say about the other areas of the design. Proportion and scale. The scale is well judged for table or plinth display, so this was on a bench, so that's good. The design fits comfortably within the acrylic frame without crowding or underfilling the space. So that was part of my choice of using this particular frame, was that I knew that it would fit perfectly into the space that was allowed. So you can see the two white markers down the tabletop there, that's the markers of the space that's allowed. It's almost, because there's no backing to the table, it almost looks too big, but I think that's just the angle of the image that was taken. Proportions between the floral materials, billy buttons, wheat heads, bird of paradise blue, and the threaded rays are appropriate. Floral inclusions remain accent details without overwhelming the structure. This is a problem for me in terms of the floral inclusions, because for this competition and for most competitions, we have a rule that states that plant material must predominate in the design. Now, depending on the judge on the day, this might not fall into that category. If they're not prepared to consider the coloured jute material as plant-based material, then the natural fibre is, because that's how it naturally occurs. But there could be judges who would feel that the coloured plant material, the coloured jute string rather, is an embellishment because it's not in its natural form. So I'd have to be really careful, and perhaps I needed to talk to the organisers before the competition about whether you could use coloured plant material, or it might be in the rules. It might say in the rules that you can use it with discretion, that sort of thing. So without telling AI that these were the basic rules, all I asked was do the assessment, the analysis based on the principles, general principles and elements of design. So it's saying that the floral inclusions remain accent details, and that's a warning signal to me to be very careful about how I interpret designs, not get carried away with the idea, but always come back to what are the local show rules and what are the areas where I might lose points with a design because a judge doesn't agree with my interpretation and the judge's decision is final. So I have to be aware that they're going to look, and they might look at it differently to the way I do. I should go back and say where it's talking about the wheat heads, that is the dried grey plant material. They're not wheat heads, but they probably look like they are in terms of its interpretation at this stage. It's still plant material. Rhythm and movement. The string arrangement creates dynamic radiating movement that draws the eye outward in all directions from the centre. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. The colour gradation from warm orange to yellow to soft grey enhances this visual rhythm, evoking the layered tones of a setting sun. Again, what I was hoping to achieve. The arc of the curved leaf and placement of spherical billy buttons subtly echo the curvature of a descending sun. So the arc of the curved leaf is the dried material, which unfortunately you can't see as well in this image as I would like, but that obviously has helped in terms of the rhythm and the movement in the design, if not so much in the balance and the line of the design. Contrast and dominance. Contrast is primarily achieved through colour. Bright yellows and oranges contrast with the cool greys and the dark backdrop. I think it's talking about the darkness that's further back in the design, in the room where the design is, but that's okay, because if it had a black backing, it would have been infinitely more impressive with those brighter colours and would have contrasted more. The central burst is the dominant feature, enhanced by colour intensity and convergence of linear elements. And that's exactly what I wanted. Rather than having a line of sunset, I wanted to, because that would be not so much the colours of sunset, but of the sunset itself. And so my idea was to have the colours of sunset be the hero of the design, rather than the sunset itself. That's my interpretation. Floral materials like the bird of paradise serve as visual punctuation, adding interest without competing with the overall dominance of the structure. So once again, my concern here is that the structure and the potential for non-plant material to be the dominant feature in the design is a worry to me, because what the analysis is saying that the plant material is adding interest and visual punctuation, but it's not competing with what is dominant, which is the structure. And unless that was absolutely and definitely considered plant material, I would be in trouble in terms of the judging. I'm not going to reveal to you what happened with the judging until the end. Unity and harmony. All components, floral, textile and structural, are cohesively integrated. The design maintains a clear conceptual unity around the idea of a sunset, with each element reinforcing that theme. And that's exactly what I wanted. As I said just a minute or so ago, I wanted the design to be about the colours of the sunset, not the sunset itself. So the idea of a sunset rather than the physicality of the sunset. The harmony of textures, smooth threads, soft flowers, fine grasses, creates a tactile richness without clutter. It is a very open design, but it is unified, as it says, in terms of its colours as well as the structure itself. That just reinforces the unity of the design. Line is the hero element here. The radiating threads create strong directional lines, guiding the eye with energy and purpose. The additional curved reed introduces a contrasting line direction, softening the geometry. That's very true. The line could be the dominant feature, but as we saw just earlier, the analysis is considering that the structure as a whole is the dominant feature. To me, because we've got the variation in the colours of the line, the visual line that is there in the string, line is not as dominant as the unity and harmony of the design. So it's just interesting to look back on that and to see what is it that pleases you about the design, that makes it work as a design, despite things that might be stronger one way or another. So you might have a very strong floral element, a particularly good-looking flower, but it mightn't be the dominant feature of the design. There might be something else that brings it all together, so that the design as a whole is something that you look at rather than the individual parts of the design. Colour. A striking sunset-inspired palette is used with mastery. Very good. Oranges and yellows mimic the warm hues of a setting sun. Cool greys may represent the approach of twilight or clouds on the horizon. So my feeling was clouds, but so at least I filled that spot as well. Use of complementary colours in subtle doses enhances visual appeal and emotion. It's interesting that it's starting to talk about emotion in a design. We all feel something when we look at a design. We like it, we don't like it, we can't work out what it is. They're all emotional responses to all of these principles and elements of design, same as it is with any artwork or any architecturally as well. So the fact that the colour is working in this design to create an emotional response is important in the design and in any design. And so we have to think very carefully about what plant material we use, as well as what plant material colours can be used. And that's why sometimes it's much harder to present a design where you can only use one colour, to choose what plant material you will use in that one colour that will still give you an emotional response rather than just be sort of a non-entity of a design. Texture. There's a nuanced play of textures. Soft, fine string contrasts with the bold tropical bloom and grainy seed heads. The acrylic base adds a smooth, polished frame to a highly textural core. So what it's saying there is that there is contrast in the textures, but they work together because we've got the smooth base, for want of a better word, so that the perspex square that's there works well with the very highly textural infill in terms of the string and the plant material. And when you look at that, what you have to think about is, would it have worked as well as a design if the perspex hadn't been used? If it had been on just a timber base, it wouldn't be as dominant a design as it is with the perspex, because the contrast of textures wouldn't be there as much, because you wouldn't get that real smoothness opposed to the very textural centre part of the frame. And it's interesting for me as well in terms of design, because texture is my thing with contrast. That's where I like to have contrast in a design, is with the textures. And on this occasion, with this design, it's not the top point scorer, I guess is the best way to put it. The texture is there, but it's nuanced, whereas line was the hero according to this analysis. So interesting for me to look at this and see that I don't always rely on texture being the hero of a design, that I do incorporate it into every design as we should. But my thinking that texture was my thing is not always the case with every design, and that's a good thing as well, because it gives me variety. So form now. The design is mostly flat and frontal, but gains dimensional interest from the three-dimensional placement of floral materials crossing the plane of the string art. This interplay between 2D and 3D creates visual intrigue. Now, if you've seen any of my videos about designs that require that depth of design to enhance the design, you'll know that that's something that I struggle with and have done for the 20 years I've been doing it. That I look at a design and I have to really work at the depth of design and think about the depth of the design, and particularly if you're using a structure as I have here that is very flat, then you've got to think about how you can incorporate that depth. And that's, as I said very early in the piece, right at the beginning of the video, that's why I was happy to have those bamboo pegs through the edge of the design so that I could do the stringing on both sides, and I could have the placements on both sides of the plant material so that you could look through the design and see that there was placement at the back as well as at the front of the design. So I did get some depth, and what it's saying is the interplay between 2D and 3D creates visual intrigue, and so that's good in terms of creating interest in the design. Space. The open spaces between threads and around floral insertions provide essential breathing room. Negative space enhances the impact of each colour zone and allows appreciation of the structure. So there is a fair degree of negative space in the design. It is quite open in terms of the spaces between the stringing of the string art. I'm probably, if I looked at this independently, I would think that there's probably too much space. But it's a very, very fine line with string art of whether you have the space so that you can see that it's string art, or whether you use it just as almost a backdrop and have it a bit closer together and have more plant material in it so that you just get hints of the string art. And there's another design called Silver Threads where I've actually used it more as the base for the placement of the plant material, so not featured the string art as much in the design. And that's a video for another day. Let's now have a look at some suggestions for improvement of this design. So firstly, refine the focal area clarity. The centre could benefit from a slightly stronger central floral mass or colour anchor to compete with the intensity of the radiating lines. Consider layering one larger texturally bold bloom to create a more pronounced visual sun. And so I'm thinking, as I'm looking at it, that what I could have done, rather than have the bird of paradise coming out, which is a little bit too esoteric in terms of the interpretation, is to have perhaps what I could have had is two chrysanthemums or dahlias, so one at the back and one at the front in slightly different colours, so an orange and a yellow, or tones of that, so that there was depth, size, focal point, and texture that meant that was where you looked, and it was plant material, and so then the colours that radiated out from that would be even more enhanced. So yes, I think I could do that with this design. Tidy thread anchoring points. Some string tension looks slightly uneven. Cleaner, more consistent anchoring would reinforce the precision and polish of the work. This is especially important since this structure is architectural. This is a hugely important point to remember, is that how we finish off any design does come into the thinking of the judges when it comes down to half a point, maybe between one or two designs. They will look at the finish and the condition of the plant material. So we talk about the finish here. Everything has to be neat and tidy and exactly in line with the design itself. I agree very much that some of the tension on the strings is not the same, and I think that comes back to the anchoring points needed to be absolutely solidly in those holes and as hard as they could be, so that I could get that tension on the string as I was doing the stringing. So very much something that needs to be reviewed in this design. Base integration. The blue circular base appears separate in tone and style from the colour theme of the sunset. Reconsider the base colour or integrate the blue as a sky or water reflection theme to tie the design more holistically. Now this is something that I noticed when I first looked at this image at the beginning of this video, because I haven't looked at it for some time, is that my first thought was, why did I use the blue base? You know, what was I thinking there? And I do think that I was thinking about the sky, but it's the wrong blue for a sunset sky. So it should have been a little bit darker. And yes, the blue should have been a little bit more integrated, or it should have been grey, like the dried plant material is, to look like clouds, or painted as clouds. You know, I could have painted clouds on it for that. It had a deeper blue and then had some clouds across it, so that it did look like it was the sunset and the sky that you were looking at. Depth variation. Adding one or two strong foreground floral elements, perhaps extending more outward from the frame, would break the flatness and invite viewer interaction from different angles. So this comes back to, I think, that what might be solved by the idea I had about using the dahlias or the chrysanthemums in that focal area and having them back and front placing, because the larger one at the back would mean that you would look through the design to see that as a focal area and have the smaller one in front of it. Or I could even have had smaller billy buttons in front of it. And so I had the dahlia or the chrysanthemum as the large feature, but behind the design almost, so that you have to look through to see, oh, what's that there? And then you bring yourself forward. So you get that depth, the idea of the depth in the design. So final thoughts on this particular design. Colours of Sunset is a striking contemporary composition that uses a string art framework to translate a natural atmospheric phenomenon into an abstract floral statement. It's imaginative, bold and carefully executed with strong control of both line and colour. This design would be well suited for a themed competition, gallery exhibit, or as a visual centrepiece for a discussion on the intersection of craft and floral art. I think that's probably a great idea for all of us to think about, is that craft and craft techniques are more and more being introduced into floral art and to floral art competitions and floral design. Is it time for us to sit down and have a discussion, open discussion and example discussion about that intersection of craft and floral art, so that for those coming through the ranks in floral art, wherever they might be in their journey, that they can get a better understanding of how that works and how each individual competition or country or wherever is thinking about that idea, because if you look at the history of floral art and floral design, things have changed over the decades, and things have been introduced that perhaps 50 years ago people would never have considered, perhaps not ever considered having designs that had most of the plant material hanging outside the vase. So it's no different to any other progression in art. There are different areas where people enjoy using plant material, or that intersection of craft and floral art, or they like to use botanical material, they like to use one plant, all of the plant, all those sorts of things. So it's a good starting point for discussion, and I do think it's time that we started to look at all of the things that make up the various areas of floral art. But I will get off my soapbox for now, because you're here to learn about things that will help you in your floral art journey. If you would like your own designs analysed by our AI, please submit an image and you'll have it back within about 24 hours. A human judge will look at the AI analysis as well, just to make sure that it will make sense to you, and it will help you on your floral art journey. For now, I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review.